All right. And so we are live. Okay. So, as per usual, I'm going to kind of get in here and wait for folks to start showing up. Um, if you join the stream, go ahead and shout out and say hello in the comments. What we were talking about tonight, or this morning, it's 10 a.m., not 10 p.m., um, is this little gem I have pumped up here on this screen. Um, one of the first dungeon crawl video games, well, computer games, if there's distinction, but it was for computers, was this game. And I used to love it. I only got to play it a few times, but definitely stuck with me over the years. So still going to wait to see if anybody comes in. I know it's 10 o'clock on a Sunday, so folks may or may not be up and running yet. I know in Pacific Pacific time zone. God, I can't even think this morning. This is gonna be a great stream. We've got folks just waking up, and hopefully, folks over in Europe and there are gonna be able to see and join. Maybe I'll even get a Saxius or I think the old geek is busy on Sundays, but we'll see. Let's see. Excuse me. Do have a bit of a frog in my throat. We've been kind of stormy, which means weather changes, which means my sinuses do all kinds of fun stuff. Gonna throw the stream link, stream invite link into the chat here also. So if you want to come on, just go ahead and use that. And so let's see. Right now, showing nobody on, but the stream count lies sometimes. So we'll see. Give it a few more moments. Hope everybody's having a good week. I know had to deal with some water in the basement last night here. We had a big old storm come through, tornado sirens and everything. But it came and it went, and it's never too bad here. I just have a couple of puddles where stuff creeps in through the corner of the walls. But everything is safe. Everything's up off the ground, so nothing got wet. But other than the bottom of the shelves and this basement dries out quick enough, so I don't worry about those. All right, well, we're 3 minutes in and the count hasn't started going up yet, so I'm just going to kick off. So way back when, there was a computer game by the name of Temple of Apshai, and this game came out. I think I played it the very first time on a Apple computer, maybe a TRS-80. I can't remember. But yeah, the game came out in 1979, and it was then later updated to later computers in like 1980 and 1986. But I must have played it back in 79 because I know where I first saw it and I know where I was living, and that's how I reference everything in my mind. Is based on my moves throughout my life. But Temple of Apshai was kind of cool. So you took on the role of a solo adventurer who was venturing into an ancient temple tomb. Obviously, it's called Temple of Apshai, but it had the very old school feel. Like the temple itself was underground, and it's sort of one of those caves of chaosy kind of things where you're underground and then you find a temple. And so this temple was to an old god um, called Apshai, and Apshai was a Egyptian themed god of insects. And never. I probably should have researched this before I came on, but as far as I know, I don't think he's a real god. I think they made him up uh, for this, but yeah. So anyways, the dungeon itself is huge. It's something like 200 rooms, and it is full of traps and monster encounters. Um, and it was an early dungeon crawler. I'm not going to get too much into the video game itself. If you want to look into the history of the game, it's certainly out there. I've done a lot of reading on it, kind of going back through the nostalgia machine myself. But what I found while I was looking through this and hadn't remembered, or maybe didn't even know because of the way I came in contact with the game, was due to the memory constraints of computers back then. They've pumped everything they could get onto the tape that it was originally on, tape drives, and then later onto disk. Um, they put everything they could into just the dungeon graphics and the monsters and stuff. And when we're talking dungeon graphics, we're not talking about anything amazing. Um, we're looking at the sort of very linear, very basic dungeons that you would expect to see early on. And I'm going to see if I can pull up some graphics here for this. Let me see here. Yeah, Temple of Apshai. I mean, when it first started out, super basic. Um, Here, I'll pull this up here, and then you can see it. But yeah, just a second. All right, there we go. So as you can see, the screens were really basic, um, and so with this kind of computing power, uh, they had to save everything they possibly could for the game itself. Later on, we got kind of an updated, you know, uh, version of the screen that looked something like this. And as you can see, it kind of went to that Commodore 64. This is the Commodore 64 era of graphics. Anyways, where I'm going with that is because the memory constraints were limited, and you can see you got a very basic information on there. You got a room number, and why is there a room number? You may wonder, and that's where I'm kind of going. So the game gave you a room number when you went into a room, and then you had your wounds and fatigue, the weight, and salves and elixirs, arrows and magic arrows. Excuse me. Anyways, the room number is what's important to take away from this, because the room number is um, where the magic of this came from in for this idea that kind of prompted this stream. Um, every room throughout the entire dungeon had a written description that came in the manual. And that is pretty cool. And so the manual was, this is for the Apshai trilogy that later on came out. So the game got a couple of follow-ups, and I'll go into that later on. But so the manual, which is available digitally, which is awesome for this project, um, nice old school manual, great old school art. Um, the Oracle of Apshai. There's lore in here. This is great. There's little fiction stories, um, loading instructions, um, tips on staying healthy in the dungeon. Like, because this was such an early game in the history of gaming, they felt the need to really talk to you about how to do it. Kind of like the early tabletop games. You figure this is coming out in 79. This is coming out contiguous with Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, the creator of this game played Dungeons and Dragons and built this and advertised this as a computer experience of the tabletop game. And I believe that it really measured up to that as best as it could. And part of the reason that it did that is the manual, and I'll get to this. So you got innkeepers where you build your character sheet and all that commands. But here we go. So death and dying, getting yourself resurrected. This is, I mean, as you can see, this reads very much like a tabletop game. All the little beats that you would expect to see in a tabletop game are there. Dungeon dwellers, friends of the dungeon. There's a dwarf and a magic user and a cleric that are in the dungeon that you can run into. Again, we got some beats from old school dungeons where you'd run into other adventuring parties. All right, and so here we go. Resources that make this really excellent for what I would love to do and what I'm planning on doing at some point, which is to go ahead and turn this into a dungeon and then play this as a campaign. We've got the three games that came out: Temple of Apshai, Upper Reaches of Apshai, and Curse of Ra. We have a list of the Temple of Apshai monsters. This is really great. Up front, you just know exactly what monsters you need. Now, I feel if I was to run this as a tabletop game, I would probably expand on this list, and that's just so it's if you've got 200 rooms of dungeon, it could get a little repetitive, even with a pretty extensive list. Jellies, skeletal bats. That's an interesting one. Skeletal bats, wraiths, zombies, vampire bats, swamp rats, and it does seem to have the usual video game progression here. For example, you've got two kinds of beetles. You've got carrion beasts. They've got carrion crawlers in here, basically. But see, you've got giant rats, and then later on you get and then you got like swamp rats, which are even bigger. It goes on. But this is the juice right here. This stuff is really what makes this absolutely just perfect for trying to turn this into a tabletop adventure. If you look at that. So we've got room 1. The smooth stonework of the passageway floor shows the advanced methods were used in its creation. A skeleton sprawls on the floor just inside the door, a bony hand still clutching a rusty dagger, outstretched towards the door to safety. A faint roaring sound can be heard from the far end of the passage. That right there, all these room descriptions are just masterpieces of brevity, but with detail. And here is everything you would need to turn this into a tabletop game. You've got what monsters are there. All I need to do is throw in monster stat blocks here, and then play around with some of the mechanics of the converting from the video game to a tabletop. The reason for these descriptions, like I said, they didn't have the memory to put this in the game itself, so they gave you this book, and it goes on and on and on through the entire game with all these different rooms. Room 45, and then level 2. There's like this is a neat thing too. Each level it lists the treasures. So laying in the dirt are 7 small diamonds. The arrows have silver points. The sword has mithril worked into the blade, the hallmark of magical arms and armor. There are always 2 gold pieces on the body. There are also 2 gold pieces on the body. Hey, Jim. Welcome in. So, and so all of this just goes there, and then later on we get the master treasure key, so it gives you the silver piece values on stuff. It gives you a conversion rate at the top. It gives you details on the magic items. Honestly, if I could ever make a pitch to Goodman Games for one of their fun, nostalgia books, it would be to turn Temple of Apshai into one of their adventures. They could do it in the same format as they've done their other old school, ones. They could do an old school version of Temple of Apshai, and nowadays they would probably do it for DCC because I think they're trying to either avoid the D&D stuff or they just want to kind of set out on their own. But even if they didn't do D&D, they could do DCC, and then they could um, do a fifth edition version in the same book, and then you could have a big old hardback. I mean, there's all this wonderful old school art peppered in here. I mean, it's none of it, not all of it's the greatest, but it's that evocative art style of the old school stuff that just splashes across the pages. So, all right, so going back to the beginning here, and kind of, I mentioned earlier that we have three different adventures, technically four games. So the games were released as Temple of Apshai, and then came Upper Reaches of Apshai, and then came Curse of Ra, and then much later came Gateway to Apshai. So the first three are done very much adventure style. Upper Reaches of Apshai is actually more of an add-on to Temple, in that it takes you to the town that the innkeeper in Temple of Apshai is from, and lets you go on some kind of little wacky, little side questy kind of things. And then Curse of Ra expands beyond the temple and out into a desert environment that then um, brings you to this to a sphinx and then a pyramid. Um, Gateway to Apshai is actually a prequel, and it was done less as a dungeon crawl adventure game and more as sort of a gauntlet style um, hack and slash game. So, as I was reading all of these, what I ended up coming up with is this framework for how to run this as a campaign. We got these four different locations, um, and they all kind of line up, um, not in the order that they were published, but they present a nice little basis for doing almost a keep on the Borderlands style of campaign. You've got the Temple of Apshai, which is clearly a mega dungeon, 200 rooms. Um, if I was to write it as a tabletop game, would I use all of those rooms? Maybe, maybe not. Um, uh, but you have a huge dungeon that sits below a town. That's the upper reaches. Um, and between those is a series of passages, which is what you're playing through in Gateway to Apshai. Gateway to Apshai is the prequel of how they cleared the passages to get the access to the old lost temple of Apshai. There's some lore in there. There's actually a good bit of lore block in the game that you could throw out for players that it talks about how the followers of Apshai were kind of driven underground, but then they found what they needed there and they built the temple. And there's this history that you could just dive into for the game. Everything you need to build this into a campaign is here. So the way that I would arrange this is I would have people start in the upper reaches. Um, the town would probably need a name or not. I mean, Keep on the Borderlands doesn't really have a name. It's the Keep. So it could just be the upper reaches. Um, you could use the mini quests that are there from the game in that sort of hometown, base town kind of thing. Though some of them are kind of silly, fighting, killer vegetables in a garden and stuff. Very kind of zany stuff. But even the computer game does offer some interesting locations. We've got the innkeeper's backyard. The innkeeper, of course, being the place where you generate your character and buy supplies and stuff. There's Meryl's cottage, or Merlis's cottage, as to say. So there's an old kind of wizardy guy here. So you have a wizard to do your identifications and all of that. And then there's Olias's cellar, which, if that's not a classic low level adventure, I don't know what is. you know. So we already have the building blocks to get base level characters into this campaign with stuff that they can do. And then there's also Benedict's Monastery. So you have healing. All of those locations have little mini adventures that are attached to them that you could easily throw into a tabletop game to get your players some starting XP. Where I would veer off from how the video games did it is I would have it to where I would flesh out the town some more. So Upper Reaches would have an inn and some other blacksmith and all of that stuff. So you create a base town, a proper base town. I would then run the gateway to Apshai as the first dungeon. Run it as the low level adventure. What's in those tunnels between Upper Reaches and the temple itself? The players could almost, and this is almost where it would fit as DCC, because you could almost use that as a funnel. I'm not a fan of DCC and its funnel system or the kind of randomness to the game, but I know a lot of people like it. But even as say like an old school, like if I was going to do this with OSE, which is probably what I would use OSE or a BX type of clone. Just run that as like a first to second level adventure through the gateway, and then they have to go through. Once they clear the gateway, it's cleared. They can travel back and forth between the town, and then they get to the temple, and then they have to get into the temple. Now the temple is this huge run, and so by the time they're done with the temple, after going through whatever 100 rooms they want to go through, then we would have the opening to the other side, which in the context of the original adventures, I believe once you get through the gateway through the Temple of Apshai, you find this desert that you then have to cross, and you find a sphinx and you find a pyramid, and which honestly kind of smacks of some of the TSR modules, but that then is where the rest of the campaigning goes. If you've got this big desert with a lost civilization in there, you've got plenty of room to start building the rest of your campaign around there. Hey, mages, welcome, welcome. So from there, you could have the party, could go do the Sphinx. They could do the pyramid, and then after that, if they're done and they want to move on to something else, great. You've run them through a fun campaign. You've had some starting encounters, some primer encounters and adventures in the town, in the Upper Reaches, in the town. You've run them through the gateway, which is a pretty bog standard linear kind of trainer dungeon to get the passageways between the Upper Reaches and the temple itself. And then you can run the whole temple as the meat of the campaign. And then once they've gained all that experience, you can put and the abilities and the powers that come with that climb, you can then have them go out into the desert. They do the Sphinx adventure, they do the pyramid adventure, and if they still want more, you've got a whole desert full of lost civilization that you can then start to homebrew your adventures on. You've got a hometown. You've got a lost temple that has now been opened, uh, at least presumably opened up and exposed to other people traveling to. So plots and stories could evolve from that. But if at that point they're done with it, well, then you can be done with it. But I think you have a very satisfying campaign. Because like I said, the temple itself is 200 rooms, and if we go to, let me see, we'll skip the Upper Reaches because, like I said, that's mostly mini adventures. And so the Curse of Ra has lots and lots. It has some new monsters to encounter. Yeah, mages. I'm kind of in the same boat. I got to play the game a few times when visiting a friend's house, but it left enough of an impression on my early D&D brain because this would have come out right about the same time I started playing D&D. So to me, it was just like, "Whoa, here's a computer game because I'd had early exposure to computer games thanks to my stepdad having brought home a PC in like 70s home computer in like 1976. And I played around with ASCII games and stuff like that. But yeah, when I saw Apshai, it was like this is the thing. This is the thing I did on the table, and here it is on the screen. What I was talking about earlier in the stream is it was amazing to find out that this documentation up here, screen left, whatever, existed that gives us so much to work with to run this on the tabletop. Um, I don't know if you were here earlier before you chimed in, but we've got room descriptions. We've got rooms 6 through 8. These dimly lit tunnels sloped steeply down, making it hard to resist moving on downward. These are very basic ones here, but later on, uh, you start getting more advanced ones. In this very large room, the walls are adorned with tapestries. Fancy rugs cover the floor, and stone tables hold countless scrolls and other useless objects. To the west, you see a doorway to a strange-looking corridor. If that's not the stuff that adventures are made of, I don't know what is. And it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on. One of the reasons we have things like and kind of talking about how I would convert this into tabletop is, for example, I might, if we're going back to that rooms 1 through 8, I would on the previous page, I would probably consolidate those into just map, um, because this was being done so early on, and because they could only fit so much on the screen at once, that rooms 1 through 8 that are going constantly downward, or 6 through 8. If you look at the map, and let me clear this out real quick here. If you look at the map, it's essentially a little spiral staircase going down. Hey, Sactius. Excellent. And so on a map that would be easily communicated by just a sloped passage marking, but they wanted to make sure we knew everything was described here. If you look at the things that you can run into here in the cursor raw, it definitely looks like the challenge. Well, I wouldn't say that it's gone up in threat, because you had vampires and wraiths in the temple. um, Now we got mummies, magic statues, giant basilisks, dust wraiths, griffins, cryosphinxes, sphinxes. I mean, that's some potent monsterage. And so, I mean, you're gonna run into a lot of fun stuff there. So, and here's what I was talking about. There's the Legend of Apshai. Let me zoom in on this. Not gonna read it, but the Legend of Apshai talks about the whole backstory with why it exists, and then there's kind of an article on the company itself. Because when this trilogy collection came out, it was done also as kind of a retrospective. They were doing something kind of cool. They had this core system called Dungeon Quest, and at the time, they were doing a lot of it. They were doing other adventure games using this Dungeon Quest mechanic. And just a moment. Um, so yeah, I mean, this could have gone on for forever. And this is one of those games that comes up for me all the time as, where did it go? This was put out by Epix back in the day, but it had 3 core games and one later kind of tacked on game that is even questionable if Gateway to Apshai was actually intended as an Apshai game to begin. um, it I always wonder where games like this go. Why haven't we seen Temple of Apshai come back in the intervening years between the late 80s and to present? I mean, crawling through Egyptian themed temple, going out, that's with full of like insect themed monsters along with other conventional D&D monsters, just sounds like a great game. And it's it just shocks me that games like this and Ultima, I know Ultima's had its problems, and so I have to imagine that this one has its problems in getting remade. But like I said earlier, I would love to see Goodman Games look into resurrecting uh, old computer games or other media as uh, game supplements. This is just ripe for doing, like I said, one of their big nostalgia books. And I think that would be an interesting way for them to go into that. I mean, I don't know what the dealings would be with trying to get the rights from Epics, or whether there's a rights entanglement that keeps further computer games from coming out. Uh, but yeah, I think that would definitely be fun to see. But until they do, I really I really think this would be a great campaign to run. Um, there are lots of maps that are out there, showing you kind of, they're very basic, but they're definitely enough to work with. The one thing that was done that I thought was really cool is there was an old article um, uh, in a magazine that gives the first three levels their maps. Hey, Echo, welcome. I wonder how many of these early adventure computer games were made from notes and campaigns from tabletop. Interesting. Uh, you know, I would, considering the origins of Temple of Apshai and the creator's very transparent and overt statements that it was based on his experiences playing D&D, I wouldn't doubt it. Um, and uh, let's see. I love this. Yes, the map for level 4 should be here, but after spending several hours entering it into my computer, I somehow, through my infinite wisdom, managed to misplace, lose, or erase it. I felt the article was still quite complete though. So see, even back then we did stupid stuff, but yeah, you can see this is a good, solid dungeon crawl. There's maybe a little too much interconnectivity between the rooms, but I mean that allows a lot of jaquazing through the dungeon, to use popular terminology. Uh, hey, Zedric, and you know whether or not you wanted to leave it this interconnected or not is completely up to you. To be honest, squirrel. To be honest, that kind of open floor plan is consistent with a lot of ancient architecture that we found through archaeology. If you look at Minoan palaces and a lot of old temple complexes, there is a lot of interconnectivity. I know some of that has to do with things like airflow and all of that in those tight living spaces, but um, yeah, yeah, you're right, mages. It's it's what are you gonna do? Let's see. But yeah, so we had resources like this. The neat thing is that as I was looking through stuff, not only did we have those collectively, but somebody was kind enough to go ahead and put them in as individual graphics. I mean, if I wanted to run this, I already have it here. Um, the And then if we go into the other resources that were made, there was some great stuff that was done later on that really helped with. Um, so here's the linear map for this dungeon, and let me pull this up here. This is a more graphical map that somebody had done later on to translate it. And the neat thing is you'll notice that It's got your start. It's got your entry point in here. It's got skulls and crossbones wherever there are traps, and then it labels which trap it is. Because remember, in the manual, it showed all the traps and the monsters described. Um, let's see. Sounds like fun. You're making me jealous. I haven't been able to play. I haven't been able to play any of my. I've had to get out of the game I was a player in, and I haven't been able to run my game for over a month now. Let's see. But yeah, you can see here we've got a good map of the the dungeon, and it also explains kind of how the rooms go together. And this is also where that room count would kind of thin out a little quicker, because if you look, room one is a hallway. How often is a hallway in D&D ever actually a room? Um, and room 3 and 2 are put together and would likely be combined into a single room. But knowing where these traps are is great. As far as I understand it, however, monsters were encountered in this randomly, and so you'd have to make a little bit of judgment as to uh, what was where. And man, that frog is really trying to jump out of my throat. But yeah, these kind of resources I found all over the internet, and they make it super easy. If you look at this one goes into a lot of detail. We've got, it's kind of hard to see on the screen because of the graphics, but if you look at it on here, we've got map key A, open doorway one way from room 2 to 3. Yeah, all right, that's cool. And then we've got over here, we've got the treasure layouts. Oh, that's what the T must mean. So, okay, never mind. The T on here is not for the trap type; it's for the treasure type. Where the treasure are located, which is incredibly helpful. Um, and then that 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 means that the traps were probably randomly generated too. Unfortunately, it's been a long time since I played it, so the gameplay of the original game, but knowing what traps are in there, knowing where the game placed them, and then using context clues from what's in the rooms and like, you could actually piece that together pretty well. Knowing where the treasures are is really neat. Um, there is a treasure in here that is undefined and almost reads like a like it should be like an artifact relic. Oh, here's the very basic Sphinx for the Atari 8-bit version. um, let's see. This is the upper reaches of Apshai. This is Merle's cottage. A lot of these maps are clearly, um, you know, a little abstracted from what they would be if they were conventional dungeon maps. But yeah, it really does. There's a lot of useful tools out there. Um, yeah. So, and this is the thing. That's why it's so in my mind. This is perfect for trying to bring to the tabletop. There's enough here to where an intuitive DM could just run it based off of this information. but a but if you wanted to put some work into it, you could definitely um, you could definitely get put together in a pretty concise adventure. This particular level looks gnarly. If indeed the skull and crossbones equal traps, which I would say is a pretty safe bet. Look at this first room you have to go through. Actually, my head's blocking it, so I'll block it. Look at this first room you have to go through. Trap, 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 trap. I mean, four traps in that one little space. And this is supposed to be Elias's cellar. So if those aren't traps, or I'm wondering if they're monsters, but yeah, it's I'd have to do some more research on these keys, but um, just doing graphic, quick looks for mapping. It's a little little too many traps, and but especially if this is somebody's cellar. I would almost feel that those are probably monster encounters for a seller. But again, reading through the docs and looking and finding out what all was actually in there and what the intent was, using the context clues provided in the in the room description, and all of that would be the best way to go. So, I mean, yeah. Well, you're going to need some because you're probably going to lose a couple. But yeah, this is the sort of thing that just really gets my imagination going. These nostalgic jumps back to things that I loved as a kid, and then learning that there was this kind of material out there for it to begin with. It just it begs, almost demands to be done. I mean, I've always wanted to run Temple of Apshai. I always thought Apshai would make a good adventure. Um, it's it's got a lot of good atmosphere. I always thought that it was a lot more, it leaned a lot heavier into the insect god stuff than it clearly does based on the monster descriptions. I mean, there are monsters in there, don't get me wrong. If we go back to the docs here, if we look to the original monster list for the Temple of Apshai, let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, so our monster list for the Temple of Apshai is, let me zoom in on this again. And if we look over here, we got Ant-Man. And honestly, D&D already provides us some stats for those. We have in a couple of forms. We got Formians, and we've got the Apsis from, or Aspis from the Slave Lords modules. In fact, it was the existence of the Aspis and this game being Apshai always made me wonder if his idea was copied from Slave Lords. I did a checking on the timelines, and it looks like Slave Lords came out first. So it's very possible he might have been inspired by that. Um, let's see. Yeah, and the neat thing is in true fantasy adventure style success, it's based on the Egyptian stuff. Clearly, we have names like Ra and Geb that are in there, but they then went and made up their own insect god. As far as I understand, it's made up. Google searches and the like don't find a lot of information. I mean, I could dig deeper into some of my folklore and mythology books and maybe find it, but um, I'd almost want to, if I was to run it, uh, you know, we got carrion beasts. Those are at home in dungeons. But I was thinking the monster list might need to be adjusted, but maybe not. Centipedes, yeah, you're gonna have those if they're crawling around in an ancient location. Ghouls are right at home in an ancient temple. Giant amoebas, whatever you want to, I know a giant amoeba is, I think, an old BX monster, or if not, you could just replace it with green slime. I mean, how do they describe it here? Creature's a massive gray protoplasm which has a strong solvent effect on living flesh. 6 to 10 feet in diameter. That's a big old ooze. But I mean, you could use gray ooze for that. Giant ants. I mean, that's about as classic as you get. Bombardier beetles, fire beetles. Those are both old school monsters. Giant leeches, giant mosquitoes. Those are kind of weird because those are kind of outdoorsy things. Yeah, exactly. Gray ooze. Um, um, I mean, giant leeches. I could see maybe being in a pool of water in there. Giant mosquitoes. I mean, I guess if you've got enough of a moist environment with standing water to support leeches, you could potentially have mosquitoes. Uh, Although the existence of water in the temple and mosquitoes in the temple, um, would be a good way to tip off to a party going through here that there was a further connection to the outside from the old ruined temple. So that could be a nice clue to use in the running of this as a campaign. And of course, ubiquitous giant rats. And then if we go to the next page and come over here, Ah, we've got giant spiders, giant termites, giant ticks, giant wasps. So now we're kind of leaning into that, and giant mosquitoes. I mean, giant mosquitoes also make sense if it is an insect god. Um, the other thing to do, honestly, Saxious, in the context of D&D, would be just make them sturges. It's kind of basically a dungeon mosquito. But I for when I was saying that about mosquitoes not making sense, that's completely ignoring the fact that this is a temple to an insect god. So if it's a temple to an insect god, any bug is on the table. So giant termites, giant ticks, giant wasps, jellies, formless masses, translucent jelly, which are 3 to 6 feet. So these are your lesser things, your ochre jellies and stuff like that, your black puddings. Skeletal bats is a weird one that's clearly a necromantic creature. Feral creatures, bare bones of bats with red ember like eyes, have wingspans of 2 to 3 feet, and will attempt to bite their prey with their sharp fangs. So clearly, we've got some magical necromantic stuff here. Um, let's see. Obviously, skeletons, which are perfectly at home in a dungeon. Spiders, of course. Again, we're leaning into that bug thing. Swamp rats. Now, this is again kind of with the leeches. We've got swamp stuff in here, so I'd have to read through the room descriptions. Well, actually, look at this. Room 1 or level 1, room 5, is a pond-filled room with a small landing to the south. Surface is of the sluggish water is covered with moss and a number of black lilies rest. So, yeah, uh, the water can be found to be about 3 feet deep. It flows almost imperceptibly into. Yeah, so there's water moving through this temple. Okay, cool. And it's slow moving and it's brackish. So leeches make sense and mosquitoes. And then if we look, room 6, covered with moss, multicolored lilies. Oh yeah, moss covered room. This chamber appears to be three. Yeah, so there's a good section of this dungeon that's covered under brackish water. So yeah, we got different environments, so it's not just a constant slog through the same stone temples. Uh, you know, Going back to the monster list, we then get vampire bats. We get wraiths. Um, I mean, and it even talks about the chill touch of their bony hands. So we're definitely getting direct calls to D&D here. I mean, there is no question that this stuff is clearly calling out D&D monsters. And then the zombies. They sometimes utilize weapons garnered from their poor victims. But then if we go through, the neat thing I like about this is, like I said, we get a master list of the monsters. We then get treasures. I mentioned earlier that there's a treasure in one of these that is crazy intense, and I think it's in Curse of Ra, but this is just the level 1 treasures. And then we go to level 2 treasures, and then we have traps. Oh, this is the other thing too. I love this too. It also lists what traps we have in the dungeon. So let's see. All right, and so we got like a lily trap. We got a needle trap. The lily trap is interesting. So lily gives off a cloud of fine powder, which causes severe swelling in your throat. So remember the room that was talking about, the swampy room with all the lilies that are in there. Well, there's an environmental trap. It just comes together. And I was looking through this. It's been a few weeks since I first looked through this and read through this and was kind of jazzed. And I put this on the board to do a video for us pretty much as soon as I started getting a jazz about it. But you have a spirit trap, a mold trap, yellow mold on the floor. And so again, they're using trap in a context here for more of a game mechanic, but we as DMs and D&D players know that a yellow mold is a thing in D&D. It's not really a trap, nor is like the lily really a trap, but They are kind of they're hazards, and I kind of put those in the same category in my brain. I mean, when I'm running dungeons or creating dungeons, and I'm thinking about putting in traps, I will often alternate to a hazard because they're trap like, but they don't have the same contrivance that a trap necessarily has. So we've got some of that going on here. Um, and I'm just going to kind of flip through this and sort of share my fun, I guess, for this. So the treasures here on level one, as I was reading through here, they're not too huge. We've got, let's see, several of the lilies can be reached. A vague memory of the healing properties of some Apshayan flowers prompts you to pluck them for later perusal. Part of the the game stuff, this stuff in the game is that you're somehow connected or you have a dream of Apshai, which could be the hook why the players are here. Maybe that's the one thing that connects all the PCs at the start of the campaign. You've all come to the upper reaches and to this place drawn by these dreams you had of Apshai. And you can even feed them the lore of Apshai, the legend of Apshai that's produced later on I think it comes in Temple of Ra. You could give that to them to read and say that this is what they dreamt about. Um, Although, Saxious, you're right. I mean, if I was to start fleshing out this monster list and trying to put in more monsters, definitely like beetle swarms and stuff would be and other insect swarms would definitely be a good idea. Yeah, I mean, so if you're doing traps and you're thinking, oh, trap, there's always that big argument like, why is the trap still working? But so a pit trap obviously is going to require some kind of trigger. But what if the it's not a pit trap? What if it's just like a washed out section of the dungeon where maybe something's undermined the floor and it's crumbly, or the bracing through a passage is loose and hanging in such a way that the characters have to move cautiously through that area, otherwise they could bring the ceiling down on themselves. You're right, that's adds to the verisimilitude. It creates I think it creates more atmosphere than just a trap. Yeah, and the thing is, that's a hook that players can choose. I mean, you could even put it up to the players to choose if they had that hook or not. Um, some people might just be there for wealth, like you said, and that way, it's you know everybody can still decide their own motivations, and then you have a party with mixed motivations, and you add that kind of potential party conflict where somebody's there with very much of a chosen one kind of angle, and somebody's just there, kind of Han Soloing it and wants their money. And going back to the list of treasures here, a plant that grows in the dark must be worth something to someone. You bag some and see phosphorescent algae. Um, and so we get all kinds of notes, which is neat. The master treasure key, I love that. Um, and so we've got pocket of in a pocket of the deceased, you find 4 gold pieces. Anyways, there's all sorts of stuff here, and it gives you all of these treasures and traps. Look at level 2. We got a ceiling trap, needle trap, pit trap, spear trap, and crossbow trap. Um, X-bow. I don't know why they decided to rate it as X-bow, but paying by the letter. I don't know. Uh, but in level 3, we've got a cave-in trap. Let's see. Behind the large web is a heap of 200 gold nuggets. And this is also what I was talking about, like context clues when you're trying to assemble this as a runnable dungeon. If we refer back to one of those maps from earlier and it shows us where treasure 18 is, then we can assume that the monster encounter either there or in the adjacent room is going to be one of the spiders. Um, so level 4, we get more lily traps. So clearly whatever water was on level 1 is again flowing into level 4 somewhere. Uh, not going to go through to find it here in the room descriptions. Um, Clearly, we got some rooms that are much more interesting, and the black marble altar carved with glyphs that give off a faint, eerie green glow. Oh yeah, somebody's gonna touch it. Um, we got treasures, we got runes. Gold plaque won't fit in your backpack, but you decide to carry it along anyway. I mean, obviously these are prompted for a video game, and so you wouldn't necessarily need to take that. Chest holds 60 gold pieces, 15 small emeralds, an emerald bracelet, 2 diamond stick pins, two golden chains, and a pair of fine leather boots with mithril silver embedded in the soles. Mithril silvers, sea magic boots. All right. So if we look at the master treasure key, those emerald bracelets, where are they? 5,000 silver pieces. That's a mighty treasure. The diamond goblet is 2,000. I want to. We also have some magic items that we get to find. We got magic weapons, magic books, magic boots, magic cloaks, skull rings. These rings have some power in relation to the living dead, which wander the underground passageways. The exact nature of this power is unknown, but they have figured in several miraculous escapes from the foul miscreants. So the skull rings are a magic item you could write up. I mean, this doc just keeps giving. Is it a ring of undead control? Is it a ring that turns the undead with limited charges? Is it a ring of protection from undead? You what is it? Magic talismans, white milky potion, simply commonly known as a healing potion. Upper reaches Apshai, again, that's kind of skippable. Um, it has been written in most of the reviews of this game that the upper reaches was kind of nonsensical. Um, if we look at I don't think we even get a master monster list for this one. Um, yeah, because some of it's ridiculous. Um, uh, oh, that's because there are no monsters in that one. But if we go to Benedict's Monastery, let's see. No, they don't list the monsters on here, which is funny because there are monsters. Um, the treasures here are kind of skeletal remains. Well, yeah, I mean, you can also, that's the other thing too. Is it even if you didn't want to turn it into a full adventure or try and convert it to an adventure, it's definitely fertile grounds for pulling ideas. Um, yeah, if you look at the master treasure key for this level, this for the upper reaches, it's berries, herbs, eggs, tomatoes, chicken soup, gold. Because it's the town, you're not supposed to be getting a lot. Um, Curse of Ra is the one I really want to point out. I'm going to go to the master treasure list though. We'll skip through it. One thing I noticed in Curse of Ra is the descriptions for the rooms are a little bit more sparse. Um, where is it? This platinum altar that is 10,250 silver pieces. um, I was looking through here to try and find what it did, and for whatever reason, this is not going. It's not scrolling down. There it is, and I couldn't find it, and that was really annoying. So again, problem with these old docs and stuff being put together is that they're not exactly, you know, um, always the best assembled. Oh, here it is. Um, where's the altar? Oh, T12. Here it is. Sorry, this is funny. Wow. A diamond-studded platinum altar. It weighs a bit, but it is well worth taking along. As you heave it from its low base, you notice a strange power surrounding you. It could have more uses than you first guessed. As far as I know, it doesn't have any, unless it's something that's revealed in the gameplay. I haven't been able to find anything. Uh, yeah, I mean they might try to tear it apart, but it's clearly a magic item. Um, Gold statue with a bird head. Lifting it is a disappointment. It must be hollow, as it weighs only a few pounds. You remove it from the pedestal, anyways. You know, I mean, a hollow statue might be a great place to throw in a surprise attack or an encounter. Um, here's a fun, useful one. On the table, you find a primitive book. Within it are examples of every hieroglyph you have ever seen. Practical, you suppose, but worthless. I exactly, and it's it's fun though. I mean, two small diamonds lie in the dirt. Diamonds in D&D, I remember if you go by the AD&D DMG, they have like a base value of 5,000 gold pieces, and then you roll up or down from there. So it's pretty crazy. Um, yeah, so we're at about an hour. I really just wanted to kind of share my glee and my joy and my ideas and thoughts on this, and just show what kind of stuff is laying out there in the fields of nostalgia that could be turned into games. As Sax just pointed out, even if you didn't want to turn this into an adventure in its own right, um, you could mine it. Um, I'm gonna find the link for this doc, and I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the description, um, when I get it posted. If for whatever reason I can't find it and it's not there in the next couple of days, hit me up. I've got it saved, obviously, so I can share it with you. And it's out there on some site in ways of nostalgia, anyways. But between this doc, the maps that we have, and the copious amount of commentary on this game, um, that's out there, there's clearly a lot of love for it. I feel like had this come out at the time that games like Pool of Radiance and stuff like that were popular, and we started to see modules created for computer games, we might have actually seen a printed adventure game for this. I have looked to see if somebody had done it, because we used to have a lot of there were some obscure third party people back in the day as well. I haven't found it. I haven't found anything that says it was. I haven't found anything inspired by it. I even poked around to see if some elements of the slave, like I mentioned, some elements of the slave pits and stuff were inspired by it or related to it at all. More than likely, this is actually inspired by that. Clearly, the Sphinx and the pyramid that come up in Curse of Ra are very basic, fundamental adventures. You know, TSR has already done those in the Pharaoh module and all of that, and a few times more and over again. Um, it does make me wonder though if um, Curse of Ra was originally intended to be a standalone game of its own, and not, and then they like shoehorned it into uh, Apshai. But bottom line, this stuff is gold. It's very useful. It makes me want to go out and find out what else is out there. I mean, I remember, if you've ever seen it, if you remember an old computer game called Darklands, it was set in Gothic Germany, like the Holy Roman Empire, and that game had a big old list of saints in the docks, and what magical effects could be invoked. It could be achieved by invoking them, because in that game the only magic it had that the players could use was invoking saints, and so they had a full list of like Catholic saints, and what powers you could get from them, and a beautiful, brilliant fold out map of Germany at the time, with roads and everything that you could use as a campaign map easily. There's that. The Ultima books, I remember having a lot of stuff in them. Um, it's just there's a lot to find out there, and just to dig through inspiration. And I guess a real quick, it's not a plug, but tying into this, about the same time that I was discovering this, I found Vermis, and I think I posted a link on for Vermis onto both my Elfbait Discord and also into Geeks Discord. Geeks Discord there. Vermis is a supplement that's been done, and they kickstarted it, I guess, to do a new printing of it. But it is a system agnostic dark fantasy manual for a video game called Vermis that never existed. So these guys wanted to do a book of ideas and concepts and inspirational work in a dark fantasy setting, and they framed it with the look and the feel of the old manuals for video games of the 80s and early 90s. And that's called Vermis, and that's tempting to pick up, even if just in PDF, because it smacks of the same stuff we're looking at here. And so I definitely appreciate those folks who showed up. We managed to get 6 people in here. I appreciate the commentary as well. I mean, the comments have been good. Uh, one of these days, I'll find a more chatty topic to throw in. But uh, and then I'll have some folks come on here. But I really appreciate you guys coming out and listening to me wax nostalgic and show off this cool idea I had. Uh, I will be back next Sunday for another stream. Until then, get out and game, and look out for the Roll for Surprise impromptu streams that come up every so often. But have a good one, folks. Thanks for coming by.